I have something this year to be thankful for that reaches a little further and a little deeper than many things that I might talk about or be thankful for. I'm thankful that I was born on a farm in northeastern Arkansas, in the land of the free and the home of the brave, instead of being born of Jewish parents in Germany at the same time. I was born in January of 1934. In January of 1934, Adolf Hitler had been in power for 1 year. He had already accomplished an astonishing amount in that 1 year. It's very difficult, I think, looking back on this and with the snippets and bits and pieces of history that we have seen, it's difficult to understand how fast some of the things happened in Germany once Hitler came to power. Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany, a nation with a Jewish population of 566,000, on January 30th of 1933. 1933, just 1 year before I was born. He quickly appointed 40,000 SA and SS men as police in Germany at that time. They burned down the Reichstag, and because of the crisis that created, by March 24th, the German Parliament passed the Enabling Act, giving Hitler dictatorial powers. So from the time he was appointed chancellor, of course, Hitler was originally elected in a democratic election. From the time that he actually became chancellor until the time he became a dictator with complete, absolute power over Germany was 2 months. 2 months is all that it took. And I sit around today and I watch people thinking that, that erosion of freedom is such that things couldn't happen, that things couldn't happen to us. The Germans would have thought a mere year before Hitler came to power that kind of dictatorial power, that kind of loss of freedom could never happen there. But the total loss of freedom in Germany took place in a short 2-month period of time. By April of that year, 1933, the Germans were already organizing a boycott of shops and businesses that were owned by Jews. In June, mind you, from January to June, Nazis opened Dachau concentration camp near Munich, followed by Buchenwald near Weimar in central Germany, Sachsenhausen near Berlin, and in northern Germany, and Ravensbrück for women. 6 months to the opening of these infamous names, these infamous concentration camps. As I said, he came to power a year before I was born, and at this point in time, my mother would have been about 3 months along when these concentration camps were established. And many people were already being moved into those concentration camps. In September of 1933, the Nazis prohibited Jews from owning land. In October, they were prohibited from being newspaper editors. In November 24th, Nazis passed a law against habitual and dangerous criminals, which allowed beggars, homeless, alcoholics, and the unemployed to be sent to concentration camps. 1 year. Incredible loss of freedom began to take place in Germany. And by the time I was born in January of 1934, Jews were banned from any of the German labor unions. They were not allowed to have national health insurance. The night of the long knives occurred that year, when I wouldn't even been walking yet, as a matter of fact, that they were purging the SA leadership. By August of that year, actually, in August of that year, Hitler became Führer as President von Hindenburg died. And 2 weeks later, he received a 90% yes vote from the German voters approving his new dictatorial powers. 90%. You talk about your approval ratings. Hitler had, at the end, down toward the end of his second year in power, 90% approval ratings in Germany, and I'm not even walking yet. Can you imagine what it would be like to be a baby in a Jewish household? The palpable fear that would exist there among Jewish people at that time, the kind of wonderment about what may take place and what the future might hold for them. I know I myself have thought many times that I wonder why they didn't get out. I wonder why they didn't see this coming. The truth is, and I did not realize it until just 2 weeks ago when I visited the Holocaust Museum, and for the first time really came face to face with what they were up against. The truth is that a lot of Jews did leave, and a lot more Jews tried to leave. But the fact is, they couldn't find anywhere to go. There was no place to go. That if my parents had gotten up and tried to come to the United States when I was a year old, they probably could not have gotten in. We were maintaining the old quotas of people coming into the country. The State Department was deliberately dragging its feet. They were passing rules right and left to actually delay the immigration of Jews into this country because this nation was, frankly, very anti-Semitic at that time. The attitudes of our fathers and our mothers were such that, and the attitudes within the State Department were such that the Jews didn't have a chance of coming here. And there are so many other places they couldn't go. By 1936, I would have been a little old fellow, 2 years old at this time, the German Gestapo was placed above the law. Not only is Hitler above the law, but the entire layer of the Gestapo is placed above the law. You've been hearing a lot, probably in recent weeks in this country, about how we are a nation of laws, and that no man is above the law, and many things have been said about the law and how we have to preserve the law in this country. And a lot of people, I don't know what people are thinking in this country right now, because there doesn't seem to be the respect for that there has been at times in the past. And I don't think we understand what it means to have a class of people, one person alone enough, a class of people who are above the law. It's the old expression, Rex Lex or Lex Rex, and Lex Rex means the law is king. The other expression means the king is the law. In other words, whatever the king decides, whatever his latest whim is, whatever it is he wants, that is the law. And as a consequence, he is above the law and can do whatever he wants to do, and you can't. Well, time passed during those years when I was growing up. Thankful that I was in Arkansas and not in Germany as a Jewish child. By the time we come to 1938, on August 26th, the Nazis order all Jews to register their wealth and their property. On June 14th of 1938, I'm 4 years old at the time, they were ordering Jewish-owned businesses to register. In July, at Evian in France, the United States convened a gathering of many nations to discuss how they might help the Jewish refugees who were trying to escape Hitler. And one of the things that came home to me in a way that it never had come home to me before when I visited the Holocaust Museum was that we knew what was going on over there at the time. It was funny, there was one soldier that was interviewed in a film that I saw who talked about how surprised he was when he came upon Dachau. He said, I did not know that anything like this existed. But if you made your way up and down that same hallway and looked up, along the wall were copies, facsimiles of United States newspapers during those years that told the story in detail. The United States knew about all these laws and all these changes of laws in Germany regarding the registration of property being frozen out from labor unions. They knew about them being deported. They knew about the concentration camps. The newspapers had these stories up all the time. And the American people shrugged their shoulders and went on. Now, I have very little doubt that man really knew when he got to Dachau. I believe him when he said he was surprised. He didn't know. The truth is that a lot of us go through our lives paying almost no attention to what the reporters, the editors, the pundits, and all that try to tell us day in and day out about what's going on in the world, and we just don't pay any attention. And if I had been a Jewish boy instead of an Arkansas boy, I would have been over there desperate. My family would have been desperate to try to find a place to send me. And some Jewish children were sent away from their families during that time. One Jewish family talked about how for some little time prior to the fact that they knew they were going to be giving this child to another family, because if they stayed with them, that the child would have no chance at life. For months, they gave that child no love. For months, they withheld themselves from affection because they wanted to make it possible for that child to leave them. And when they saw the child off, their mother said it was the hardest thing that she'd ever done in her life. It tore the heart right out of her. But they had to do it for the sake of the child. People were making incredible sacrifices just to try to get their children out of Germany. And an awful lot of the children had no place to go. Some countries, some people made some kind of steps to take the children, but they wouldn't take the adults. It's astonishing when you understand that people are the strength of their nation. What an incredible influx of talent we would have brought into this country in the 1930s if we had accepted unlimited Jewish immigration from Germany alone, if nothing else, or from those lands that were threatened by Germany. We would have actually helped our country in the process of doing so and would have saved lives in their thousands. But we didn't do that. The United States convened this conference. There were delegates from 32 countries to help the Jews, but they resulted in no action at all because no country would accept them. In July of 1938, Jewish doctors were prohibited by law from practicing medicine. Physician, doctor, couldn't practice medicine any longer. By 1938, November, Ernst von Roth, the third secretary in the German embassy in Paris, was shot and mortally wounded by the son of a deported Jew. And out of that came Kristallnacht, the night of the broken glass. And I didn't know this, and I bet you didn't know it either, that after the night of broken glass, how many of you know what Kristallnacht was? I mean, you knew that already. Yeah, that's the night when the Nazis rampaged through Jewish areas of time, destroyed their stores, broke out the glass of their window. They call it Crystal Night because the streets were absolutely strewn with broken glass, giving the impression of crystal on the streets and so forth. Nazi shops were burned, broken into, glass was broken, and so forth. Absolute riots ran through the city. On November 12th, 2 days after Kristallnacht, Nazis fined the Jews 1 billion marks for damages related to Kristallnacht. Never knew that until today. 2 billion marks for damages related to Kristallnacht when the Jews were minding their own business and these mobs rampaged through their part of the town. There's a peculiar kind of evil that creates this kind of a moral response. We'll tear up your property, and then we'll charge you for damages to your property. 1939, May of 1939, I was 5 years old. So I can sort of remember a lot of what was going on about that time. I remember going out to visit Granddad's farm. I remember, wandering down through the woods and watching them, the dogs as we go out and hunt squirrels and things like that. In May of 1939, the St. Louis, which was a ship crowded with 930 Jewish refugees, that had an agreement that they would go to Cuba and Cuba would accept 930 refugees. When they got there, Cuba turned them away and would not allow them to land. They tried to go to the United States. The United States would not allow them to land. They tried several other countries. The other countries would not allow them to land, and eventually they had to return to Europe. And most of those people died. September 1st that year, Jews in Germany were forbidden to be outdoors after 8 p.m. in the winter and 9 p.m. in the summer. September 23rd, German Jews were forbidden to own radios. Couldn't even have a radio. By October 26th, forced labor decree issued for Polish Jews aged 14 to 60. 1940, I finally managed to get to 6 years of age, ready to go to school. The Nazis closed the town of Auschwitz in Poland near Krakow to be the site of a new concentration camp. In January of that year, this quote appeared in a Nazi newspaper, Der Stürmer. The time is near when a machine will go into motion which is going to prepare a grave for the world's criminal, Judah, from which there will be no resurrection. I'm 6, and this is happening, and this kind of statement is published and is known. The embassies knew it. The State Department knew it. These things were all out there for the world to see, and nobody paid any attention at all. November 15, 1940, the Warsaw Ghetto containing 400,000 Jews is sealed off. 1941, Hans Frank, the Gauleiter of Poland, states, "I ask nothing of the Jews except that they should disappear." Same year, same month, January, quote from a Nazi newspaper, Der Stürmer, "Now judgment has begun, and it will reach its conclusion only when knowledge of the Jews has been erased from the earth." I mean, what do you have to begin to grasp or to get through your mind what these people are intending to do? I mean, it was clear from very early times. And yet, our country did nothing, Britain did nothing, Britain wouldn't allow the Jews to go into Palestine because of problems they were having with Arabs and the concern about oil and all the things connected with that, and so on it went. These people were frozen out of everywhere. Summer 1941, Hitler summons the Auschwitz commandant Horst to Berlin and tells him, the Fuhrer has ordered the final solution of the Jewish people. We, the SS, have to carry out this order. I have therefore chosen Auschwitz for this purpose. As the German army advances, SS Einsatzgruppen follow along and conduct mass murder of Jews in seized lands. And I really had not focused on that until I went to the Holocaust Museum. They had killing teams. That is, the army went in and took a Russian or Polish city. Along behind them would come these Einsatzgruppen, and they would dig these deep trenches. And they would line the Jews up along these trenches and shoot them in the back of the head, or they'd make them get down the trench and shoot them down the trench. And if they were not completely dead, they'd cover them up anyway. This was a systematic, deliberate extermination of every person of Jewish extraction, every city that they found in those areas. And I thank God, that I was born in Arkansas and not in Poland or Germany or East or Western Russia, where these people came through, wiping out Jewish children in their dozens. And children were not exempt. Children in the concentration camps, little children were among the first to go because they were a liability. They couldn't work. They couldn't do any slave labor. So they were stripped naked, and their clothes were piled into a pile for shipment to German children, and the children were killed. September 3rd, 1941 was the first test of Zyklon B gas at Auschwitz. September 29th, we're in 1941. 1941, I'm 7, second grade. The Einsatzgruppen murdered 33,000 Jews at Baba Yar near Kiev. In October, 35,000 Jews from Odessa were shot and killed. That was the method. Line them up, mow them down, cover them up, and go on. And I saw one of the films of one of these groups at work, and it is almost impossible to get your mind around what's going on here. You see the trench, and this was a surreptitiously photographed event by a German soldier, shooting between a couple of guys. And you saw the trench, and you saw these guys getting down in the slot down below and standing there at the bottom. All of a sudden you hear a volley of shots, and all those men collapse in a heap. And a man walks along the edge of it with his foot, kicking dirt into the hole over the bodies. And you try to, I wanted to feel something. And I felt nothing. I felt almost nothing. I just was numb in watching such a matter-of-fact event. The horror of it somehow just didn't come through. And I wonder sometimes what's wrong with us when we're able to look at these things. And the whole Holocaust Museum experience was strange to me because they made no attempt in there to tug on your emotions. They made no attempt in there at Bathos or to try to make this thing any worse than it was. Because one of the things that people who study the Holocaust say is that everything about it was banal, mundane, ordinary. The walls in the Holocaust Museum are just brick and steel, painted steel, dark brownish gray painted steel. The whole impression is one. There's no food or drink allowed in the place. There is no place to get a sandwich. There's no place to get a snack anywhere in the Holocaust Museum. And I thought, how appropriate. This is no place to eat. This is a place to fast. They had water fountains here and there, but even those were strategically located and away from the exhibits themselves. As you went through there, the realization of what was taking place, they wanted the facts to speak. And the facts spoke. And as I wandered through the place, I could again and again think of myself as having been one of those people and what it would have been like to be an inmate, to be a child, in my case at those ages, or to be an adult who had the duty of taking the bodies of those children either to burial or to the crematorium. In December 1941, in occupied Poland near Lodz, Chelmno extermination camp becomes operational. Jews taken there are placed in mobile gas vans and driven to a burial place, while carbon monoxide is fed into the sealed rear compartment, killing them. The first gassing victims include 5,000 gypsies who had been deported from Germany to Lodz. December 12th, the ship Struma leaves Romania for Palestine carrying 769 Jews. They were supposed to be able to land. but they were denied permission by British authorities. They couldn't disembark. And so it sailed back to the Black Sea, where it was intercepted by a Soviet submarine and sunk as an enemy target. All of them, I guess, died. Mass killings of Jews in January of 1942 of Jews using Zyklon B began at Auschwitz-Birkenau and Bunker 1, with the bodies being buried in mass graves nearby. In May 18th of 1942, the New York Times reports on an inside page that the Nazis have machine-gunned over 100,000 Jews in the Baltic states, 100,000 in Poland, and twice as many in Western Russia. I saw that paper, saw a picture of that paper. It was back on about page 6 or 7. There were all kinds of United States news and things going on in this country on the front page of the Times that day. But the machine gunning of 200,000 and then more people, 400,000 people in Eastern Europe was back on page 6 or page 7 in the newspaper at that time. It really makes you wonder, where as a people our heads were and what we were thinking. June 30th and July 2nd, the New York Times reports via the London Daily Telegraph that over 1 million Jews have already been killed by the Nazis. 1942. I was 8. 8 years old, second grader, going to school, throwing rocks at the kids across the street, playing hooky and going hiding out in a little area in the woods not far from the house with the dog, having a good time of life. And God, am I thankful that I was there and not in Auschwitz or Birkenau or Buchenwald or one of those places. The summer of that year, 1942, Swiss representatives of the World Jewish Congress received information from a German industrialist regarding a Nazi plan to exterminate the Jews. And they passed the information on to London and Washington. And the United States State Department resisted doing anything at all about it. In fact, it was 5 days after one of the major reports, one of the first reports came out about the mass killings in Eastern Europe, that the President of the United States said one word about it in public. 5 days. On September 9th of 1942, open pit burning of bodies begins at Auschwitz in the place of burial. The decision is made to dig up and burn those already buried, 107,000 corpses, to prevent the fouling of groundwater. I don't know why it was, but that one hit me as hard as anything I think I read. They buried all these bodies out there, and then they had to realize they had to go dig them up and bury them because they were fouling the groundwater with the dead bodies in that area. In 1942, September 26th, the SS began cashing in the possessions and valuables of Jews from Auschwitz and Majdanek. German banknotes went to the Reichsbank. Foreign currency, gold, jewels, and other valuables were sent to SS headquarters of economic administration. And watches, clocks, pins, were distributed to troops at the front. Clothing to German families. Now, if you think in terms of how little it is you brought with you here today, if we took the gold out of your teeth, took your wristwatch, your glasses, your neckties, your shirts, pants, dresses, blouses, bras, all your underwear, and we took all that you came here with today, roll them up, how big a space do you think it would take? All that you carry with you here today, if you were stripped naked of it, then it's taken away from you. By February of 1943, 800 boxcars of goods like this had been shipped away from Auschwitz alone. 800 boxcars of just the remnants and the leftovers of people who had died. Been murdered, gassed, cremated, buried, dug up and burned again after that had taken place. And so the story goes on and on through this time. In 1943, June 25th, a newly built gas chamber crematorium 3 opens at Auschwitz. With its completion, the 4 new crematories at Auschwitz have a daily capacity of 4,756 bodies every day. I did the math. 7 days a week, it's 1.6 million people a year that they could get rid of in Auschwitz at that time. They didn't get rid of quite that many, but that was the capacity. They did, however, set one-day record of 9,000 people disposed of, either by the crematoriums. Some of them had to be buried or burned and buried at that time in open pits in order to deal with the 9,000 that they got rid of in one day. November of 1943, I'm 9 by this time, and I'm still in Arkansas, thankfully. The United States Congress holds hearings regarding the State Department's inaction regarding European Jews in the face of mounting reports of mass extermination. November the 3rd, 1943, Nazis carry out Operation Harvest Festival in Poland. You know what Operation Harvest Festival was? Killed 42,000 Jews. In November of that year, a quote from a Nazi newspaper published by Julius Streicher, "It is actually true that the Jews have, so to speak, disappeared from Europe, and that the Jewish reservoir of the East, from which the Jewish pestilence has for centuries beset the peoples of Europe, has ceased to exist." But the Führer of the German people at the beginning of the war prophesied what has now come to pass. January 25th, 1944, a diary entry by Hans Frank, Gauleiter, Poland, concerning the fate of 2.5 million Jews that had originally been under his jurisdiction in Poland. He said, quote, "At the present time, we still have in the general jurisdiction 100,000 Jews." Out of 2.5 million, they now had left in Poland 100,000. In May of 1944, 10-year-old boy I am at this time, still going to school, still in Harrison, Arkansas. Himmler's agents secretly proposed to the Western Allies to trade Jews for trucks, other commodities, or money. And it was in summer of that year that Auschwitz-Birkenau set that record of 9,000 in one day. October 30th, 1944, the last use of the gas chambers at Auschwitz. In late 1944, Oskar Schindler saved 1,200 Jews by moving them from Plasgow labor camp to his hometown of Brunlitz. January 27th, 1945, Soviet troops liberate Auschwitz. By this time, an estimated 2 million persons, including 1.5 million Jews, have been murdered there. April 10th, 1945, Allies liberate Buchenwald. April 15th, 1945, approximately 40,000 prisoners were freed at Bergen-Belsen by the British, who report that both inside and outside the huts was a carpet of dead bodies, human excreta, rags, and filth. April 29th, the United States 7th Army liberates Dachau. April 30th, 1945, Hitler commits suicide in his Berlin bunker. What a shame. What a shame. What a shame that he couldn't have hanged along with the rest of those men that he used to create this terrible, terrible thing that took place over there at that time. As we approach Thanksgiving this year and rejoice before God and the bounty that He has given us and the chance of living in a free country, I think it's worth a moment to stop and think about not only these millions of people who died at the hands of this evil of absolutely incredible proportions, but the people who are dying at the hands of evil even right now, and people who are being deliberately starved by their enemies, people who are being captured and sold on slave blocks around here, still in the world today, and the kind of atrocities that are being performed, attempts at genocide, attempts at wiping out entire races of people that are still going on in the world today. The incredible evil that is afoot on this planet boggles the mind at times. And here we sit in our land, enjoying ourselves, unparalleled prosperity. I don't know, has this nation ever been more prosperous than it is right now at this point in time? I don't think so. I don't think we ever have been. And there's a tendency to think that, well, this is going to go on forever. Nothing bad could ever happen to us. Nothing like this could ever come upon us because we're a free people and we live in a free land. And we forget that in the 1920s, Germany was a free people and lived in a free land. That Germany coming after the war, they were staggering under reparations, they were having their difficulties, but Germany was pulling back and Germany was prospering. It was 1929 that created the chaos and the confusion that brought the German economy to its knees and eventually brought Adolf Hitler to power. It was not the reparations, it was the Depression, the economic collapse in the world. And you wonder how such a thing could ever happen and how that such an evil could ever get a foothold. Well, it can. It did. It has. And it will again. I'd like for you to turn back with me, if you would, to Deuteronomy, the 6th chapter. Because I think there is an object lesson here that is very much related to Thanksgiving, very much related to our attitude toward the things that we have, the world we live in, and toward the God that gave them to us. In Deuteronomy 6 and verse 1, these are the commandments, the statutes, and the judgments, which the Lord your God commanded to teach you, that you might do them in the land where you're going to possess it, that you might fear the Lord your God to keep all his statutes and his commandments which I command you, that you and your son's son, all the days of your life, that your days may be prolonged. I want you to live a long time. I want you to see your children. I want you to see your children's children, to have all these good things in your life. Hear therefore, O Israel, and observe to do it, that it might be well with you, that you may increase mightily, as the Lord God of your fathers has promised you, in the land that flows with milk and honey. And candidly, folks, if that was a description of Palestine at the time of the Israelite invasion of Palestine, can you imagine how one might have described this land when it fell into our hands some 200, 300, 400 years ago? A land of milk and honey, a land out of whose hills you can dig brass and iron. All the natural resources you could ever want are right here and in our hands. He said, understand this. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And these words that I command you this day shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and you shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. Now, you know, I think one of the most terrible things that has ever happened and been done to people in religion is to take the law of God, turn it into a yoke, and slap it on people's neck, as legalists have been prone to do down through every generation of man. Every generation of those people who have worshiped God, every generation of people who have known God, every generation of people who have known about God's law, have sought to take the law of liberty and to turn it into a yoke of bondage. And what God is telling Israel here is this incredible law that I have given you. If you will do it, if you will teach your children to do it, if you will obey this law, and this will be the way of life for you, because you live this way, you will be a wise and understanding people. You will be successful in the things that you do. You will be in the right place at the right time. And the effect of the wisdom and the knowledge of keeping this law will make you a mighty and respected and successful people in the earth. It's a law of cause and effect that we are talking about here. But it degenerates in people's minds to the idea that there's a God in heaven who's sitting in front of a switchboard with little switches all over the place. And if you or I break one of the technical points of the law, he flips a switch and takes something away from us or punishes us for doing so. Or if we keep this law, he flips a switch and sends a blessing upon us, never realizing that God does not have to lift a finger for the law to work. Doesn't have to say a word, lift a finger, or do anything. For the law is the law, and it grows out of the nature of man and the nature of God and the relationship between the two that grows from those natures. So he tells them, here's the law. Teach it to your children, because this is going to be to your success. I don't mean to say by that there is not a blessing and a cursing, or a blessing and a punishment that God does intervene and carry out from time to time, because he most certainly and assuredly does. He says, you'll bind them for a sign upon your hand and as frontlets between your eyes. That doesn't necessarily mean that you actually write them on your hand. The hand is a symbol of what you do. The forehead is a symbol of the way you think. He said, I want this to be in your hand and in your mind, that this is the way you're going to live your life. You shall write them on the posts of your house and on your gates. And it shall be when the Lord your God has brought you into the land which he swore to your fathers, to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, to give you great and goodly cities that you didn't build, and houses full of all good things which you didn't fill, and wells digged which you didn't dig, vineyards and olive trees which you didn't even plant. When you have eaten and you shall be full, then beware that you don't forget the Lord that brought you out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage. This is one of the oldest admonitions in the world that's ever found anywhere in anybody's literature. And it rings down to us right here, right now, today. When you have gotten into the land, and when you have eaten and you are full, beware that you don't forget the Lord your God. You know, the prophets warned Israel and said, as you were increased, so you sinned against me. And our very prosperity may be the biggest danger that we face, because of the staggering apathy that it has brought upon us as a people. A people who really, right at this moment in time, even in elements involving people in the highest offices in the land, they don't really care. They don't want to hear about it. They just want it to go away. The idea of justice and of truth and of doing right is not nearly as important as just, let's get all this out of our face so that we can go on and enjoy our lives and our prosperity and all the things that we have. You know, in World War II, when these people were dying over there, a lot of our young men went over and died there. In fact, I had an uncle who went to Germany and who died in Germany on his way to release some of these people, on his way to put an end to some of this oppression. We gave our lives. There was a time when we were willing to do that kind of thing. Nowadays, would we be able to muster that kind of support? In fact, right now, as we talk, the congressmen are all charged off on vacation right now. Nothing much is being done in Washington right now about this. But people in Bosnia, people in Kosovo have this year and will before this winter is out be dying because of the evil of men who oppress them. And these are kind of things that we have to face the question. Are we going to say, like James A. Baker III did, we don't have a dog in that fight? There's no national interest to us there. Because you see, that kind of attitude was precisely the same spirit that this country had in the 1930s, when we knew about what was happening in Nazi Germany, when we knew about the risks of all those people, and even when we knew they were dying in ovens and being gassed and then burnt, even when we knew it, we would not increase our immigration quotas for Jews out of Europe. Because, no, that's not our business. It's not something we want to be involved in. I don't know, folks. We have, as a people, a habit of whenever we start becoming well-to-do, when we are fed and when we are full, we don't really remember God. And we don't really think about the challenges that we face. We don't really think about sacrifice. We don't really think about justice and doing right, even if it costs us something. We get to a frame of mind that if it's going to cost me anything, well, I don't know. Later he says in verse 20, when your son asks you in that time to come, saying, what's the meaning behind these testimonies and the statutes and the judgments which the Lord our God has commanded you? Then you shall say to your son, we were Pharaoh's slaves in Egypt, and the Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand. And the Lord showed signs and wonders, great and sore, upon Egypt and Pharaoh and upon all his household before our eyes. And he brought us out from there that he might bring us in to give us the land that he swore to your fathers. And the Lord commanded us to do all these laws, these testimonies, these statutes that you're asking about, for our good always, that he might preserve us alive as it is this day. It shall be our righteousness if we observe to do all these commandments before the Lord our God as he has commanded us. You might say, if we do all this, we'll be right. We'll be right. For the Lord your God shall bring you into the land that you go to possess it, and has cast out many nations before you, the Hittites, Girgashites, Amorites, and all this gang, 7 nations greater and more mighty than thou. He tells them, what all they're supposed to do with it. Then in verse 6, he said, you're a holy people to the Lord your God. The Lord God has chosen you to be a special people to himself above all people on the face of the earth. The Lord did not set his love upon you, nor choose you, because you were more in number than any people. Oh, no. You were the fewest of all people. He did it because he loved you, and because he would keep the oath he had sworn to your fathers. He made a promise to Abraham, and that's why he did this, because he loved you and because of your promise. Later on, he said in verse 12, it shall come to pass, if you'll listen to these judgments and keep them, that the Lord shall keep to you the covenant and mercy that he swore unto your fathers. He will love you and bless you and multiply you. He'll bless the fruit of your womb, the fruit of your land, your corn, your wine, your oil, the increase of your cattle. In verse 15, he'll take away all sickness, and will put none of the evil diseases of Egypt that you know upon you, but will lay them on all them that hate you. Now, there is so much in here that I might take the time to read today, but I think time would get away from us. But there is this warning again and again about the incredible wealth of the land that he is going to give them. And the warnings again and again, like in verse 12 of chapter 8, when you have eaten and are full, when you have built goodly houses and you've lived in them, when your herds and your flocks have multiplied, and your silver and gold is multiplied, and all you have is multiplied, beware that your heart be lifted up, and you forget the Lord your God that led you out of Egypt from the house of bondage, who led you through that great and terrible wilderness wherein there were fiery serpents. And I might stop here and say, if you want to try to make some kind of application for it for us today, you look at us here today and the incredible wealth that we have as a people, to where even the poorest among us are almost live like kings compared to what most people in the world, certainly the poor of the world live in from time to time. And the warning is, he says to Israel, don't forget that you were slaves. And none of us have been there. None of us have experienced that. We have not gone through this. But when you go through some place like the Holocaust Museum, and you listen to these old people tell their stories, and when you see the pictures and the photographs that took place there, you can realize here is a people who know what it is like to be slaves. Here are people who know what it's like to be tortured, to be used for medical experiments, to have seen their loved ones being, dying of starvation and typhus and diseases in these camps, who have seen this horrible life. And maybe it would be good for us at a time like this in our life, when we are at absolute unparalleled wealth, to consider what our lives might be like, could just as easily be like as what we are. For I could have been one of those kids that was shot and thrown in a pit, and my clothes sent back to Germany for some good German Aryan family, if I had just been born at the same time to Jewish parents in a German city or a Polish city. Might never have gotten to school. Might never have gotten to be 8 years old by the time those 2 million Jews and others have been killed in Eastern Europe. Might never have had the chances of life that I have had today. And so when we enjoy the wealth and when we thank God for these things, there should be some depth in there when you consider how things might have been and what other directions that it will go. He said, in verse, he talked about how God led you through that great and terrible wilderness. In verse 16, he fed you with manna, which your fathers never knew. He did these things that he might humble you and prove you to do you good at your latter end. Lest you don't forget that and say in your heart, my power and the might of my hand has gotten me this wealth. It's all mine. No. You shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he that gives you the power to get wealth, to establish his covenant, which he swore to his fathers, as it is this day. And it shall be, that if you do at all forget the Lord your God. Okay, here comes the warning. If you do at all forget the Lord your God, and walk after other gods and serve them and worship them, I testify against you this day, you shall surely perish. And we have seen little illustrations of this down through history, of the times and the circumstances, of all the things that have happened to them. We have seen enough illustrations of this. We should be able to understand how possible it is. In Deuteronomy 28, there's this long chapter of blessings and cursings, and it sits there like a testimony to man down through all the ages. Live this way, you'll be blessed. Live this way over here, and something entirely different is going to come to you. And there's this little segment here toward the end of this where he talks about what the condition would be of a people that forget God, a people who turn their back on God, a people who reject his laws, his commandments, his statutes, and his judgment. And it is when I read this that all of a sudden, coming back before my eyes were the films, the exhibits, the people, the pictures of the Holocaust Museum. He says, moreover, these curses shall come upon you and pursue you and overtake you till you be destroyed, because you didn't listen to the voice of the Lord your God to keep his commandments and his statutes which he commanded you. And they shall be to you for a sign and for a wonder, and upon your seed forever, because you serve not the Lord your God with joyfulness and gladness of heart for the abundance of all things. Now, I don't mean to say, and please don't take this way, that the Jews deserved what they got, or that God brought all this upon them because of their evils and so forth. I would never want to say anything like that. But I will tell you what I will say, that it's a cautionary tale for you and I, that whenever this thing says, because you serve not the Lord your God with joy and gladness of heart for the abundance of all things. Therefore, you will serve your enemies, which the Lord your God shall send against you, in hunger and in thirst and in nakedness and in the want of all things. And he shall put a yoke of iron upon your neck until he has destroyed you. And you don't go looking around saying, well, they had it coming, or, well, those people deserved it, or, well, that's too, I'm sure glad I'm not those people there. It's over there. It's not over here. The warning is to everybody who ever lived. And Jesus himself made a statement similar to this. And he said in Luke 13, verse 1, he said, there were present at that season some that told him of the Galileans whose blood Pilate had mingled with their sacrifices. And Jesus answering said, do you suppose that these Galileans were sinners above all the Galileans because they suffered such things? Do you really think that the Jews who went to Auschwitz were sinners above all men because they suffered such things? No. Not at all. In fact, I would say if you want to gather a sampling of the people who kept God's law, at least in some measure, gave some attention to God's law, maybe even taught their children about God's law, in all of Germany at that time, the Jews would have been a long way from the worst of that lot. And so it is. He said, do you think that they were worse than anybody else because they suffered these things? I tell you, no. But except you repent, you shall all likewise perish. Or that 18 upon whom the tower in Siloam fell, do you think they were sinners above all men that dwell in Jerusalem? I tell you, no. Unless you repent, you shall all likewise perish. And so when I look at this, and I read through this incredible timeline of the Holocaust that took place and all the things that were done, I have to look at that and say, unless we repent, we will all likewise perish. That the evil that exists in this world is sitting there with gaping jaws, ready to grasp, ready to eat, ready to devour, and to destroy anyone that comes under its power. It is there all the time, waiting for us. All it needs is a relaxation of vigilance. And here we are, not only living in a time of perhaps the greatest wealth our country has ever known, we're living in a time of almost unparalleled apathy. Not only in the nation, but it's also true in the church. Because it's very hard to live in the society under these circumstances and be unaffected by what is around us and what goes on. Life is okay. Life is working. And so we don't care. And we don't want to rock the boat. We don't want to cause problems for anybody. And so, like Jews, who didn't want to cause a lot of problems for somebody, we could someday find ourselves herded into boxcars, 100 of us in one small boxcar. Be 200 of us in an American-sized boxcar would fit nice and tight. We may also one day find ourselves in that kind of circumstance. It is inconceivable that it could happen. And yet, down through history, people have given up their freedom time and time and time again. When they just didn't care enough to fight for it. They didn't care enough to do the right thing even when it hurt. They didn't care enough to tell the truth even when it was embarrassing. They didn't care enough to swear even to their own hurt and then stick to their word. Whenever they didn't care enough about the fundamental principles of God's Word. Jesus went on to say, a parable. A certain man had a fig tree planted in his vineyard. And he came looking for fruit on it and didn't find any. He said to the dresser of the vineyard, behold, I have come 3 years seeking fruit on this tree, and there isn't any. Cut it down. Why is it cumbering the ground? And he said, well, Lord, let it alone this year also till I shall dig about it and dung it, and if it bear fruit, well, and if not, after that, you shall cut it down. What do you think that means? Spoken to a first century audience and then transmitted down through time to us today? After having just said, do you think that those people who went through that and suffered that are worse sinners than other people because it happened to them? No. Unless you pull your socks up, unless you get your act together, unless you repent, you shall likewise perish. Then said, I've been here 3 years looking for something and I haven't found anything. Cut it down. And somebody says, no, give me just a little time longer to work on it. And if it doesn't bear fruit then you can cut it down. I look at that, read these scriptures, and I think to myself, what's it going to take You know, what sort of digging, what sort of dunging, what sort of pruning of the tree is it going to take for us to shake off the apathy, for us to get hold of ourselves, for us to realize that we're not as wealthy and as happy and as healthy and as well-fed as we are today because we are better than those people who were starved to death, literally, who were worked to death, literally, who were, in some cases, because they were weak or little or too small and unable to work, were just shot, killed, gassed, and their bodies burned or buried. We're not better than they were. We're the same kind of people they are. They, in their lives, were apathetic as they saw the loss of freedom. And they and their neighbors around them were willing to sell out certain aspects of their freedom so they could have a job, so the trains would run on time, so that the confusion and chaos that existed in their society would somehow go away. The Bible seems to tell us that we will face that precise type of circumstance again. And I was moved to say when I was doing the Revelation program series not long ago, and another series even after that, I believe, to say that there will come yet again another Holocaust. I think as we approach Thanksgiving this year, that thing, that little word that says, because you did not serve God with joy and with gladness for the abundance of all things, ought to ring as a cautionary tale in our mind. And I'm glad to get to tell you about it a few days before, because on Thanksgiving Day, I hope you will be joyful. And I hope you will be glad. And I hope you will be with family and with people who love you and with people that you love, and that you can spend time together and rejoice and give thanks to God from the bottom of your heart that you are where you are and not somewhere else.